Hey, Allie, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about sharks?
Oh, yes.
Allie, I want to welcome Allie to the show today. I'm very happy to have Allie on today as our special guest on. Allie's the director of the conservation for the Shark Trust in England, and Allie did her BSc with honors in marine environmental science at Plymouth University, as well as an MSc in applied marine science as well. Allie was the 2021 International Fund for Animal Welfare Marine Conservation Award for outstanding dedication to protecting sharks. She's also a member of the IUCN Shark Specialist Group and the secretary for the European Elasmobranch Association. And her conservation efforts with the Shark Trust focuses on securing management and protection for vulnerable shark and ray species. And Allie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, David.
I start off asking our guests, how did you get interested in sharks and sort of marine conservation?
I really can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in the sea, to be honest. But I was really fortunate to spend quite a few of my formative years living in Cyprus. And I just had that opportunity as a 6, 7, going into 8-year-old to spend an awful lot of time sitting on the bottom of the seabed. Quite literally, I'd pick up a rock and put it in my lap. And my people would say, "You're not worried about her?" And they'd say, she'll come up when she needs to breathe. And beyond developing a healthy respect for moray eels, because my one rule was I wasn't allowed to put my hand in any crevices, it was amazing. It was just a phenomenal opportunity to watch time go by and everything that goes with it at the bottom of the sea.
Obviously, it's a terrific experience in your early years like that. So, and as you went along, so where did you sort of went to school in Plymouth and stuff, and where did your career sort of take you from there?
So I went to school, sort of normal schooling in the southwest of the UK. And when I finished my senior school, I went off traveling to Australia. And I was set, like many young people, to travel up through Australia, up through Thailand, etc., into India. Only I landed in Townsville. And I think a really pivotal moment in my life was the decision to turn left or right out of a bus station, because it resulted in me over time getting a job on a sailing boat out of Townsville, a beautiful traditional wooden boat. And we had then connections to James Cook University and to the Australian Institute of Marine Science. And by sort of a complete alignment of stars or whatever else, I found myself as an 18-year-old, basically as a research assistant for some of the scientists out of James Cook and Ames. And we would go out, we did some sea snake sampling work, we'd go and count dugongs, we do all sorts of different aspects of work. And one of the most sort of fascinating sort of full circle pieces for me is that the boat that I worked on was built in the Solomon Islands. And the Solomon Islands, they had missionaries there from Scotland who taught the locals to be shipwrights. And my skipper went across, took very simple tools, and they worked in very traditional manners to build an incredible wooden boat out of predominantly cyclone-felled timber. And, sharks are revered in the Solomon Islands. And when the boat left, a blessing was put onto the boat, which very, very crudely translates as, if you don't eat sharks, then sharks won't eat you. So as a sort of 17, 18-year-old, I found myself, working in an environment, and around Townsville, the waters there have a significant diversity of sharks. And I find it really fascinating that, there I was in my late teens, working in that environment. And then, several decades later, I sort of came back round into a scenario where working again with sharks. So, yeah, that was an interesting one.
It's really interesting how when you got that start in your life, but not only from a science perspective, but you really got a perspective from like sort of local sort of outlook on sharks. How did that influence you? That sort of being seeing blessings and seeing sort of the respect that locals have, like local communities have for sharks. How did that influence your career in any kind of way as a scientist and a conservationist?
One of the things it did do was I actually changed my university course. So I was set to do pure marine biology, and I actually stepped away from that and went into a broader, more holistic approach through environmental marine biology, because I became very keen on understanding wider processes. What was actually impacting on that marine environment? What are the bigger drivers beyond just the sort of science and biology and ecology of the species themselves? And Townsville in North Queensland is an incredible place for that. You have the headquarters of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. You have Ames and James Cook. And I really feel fortunate to have had influences from those people and senior individuals in those institutes, because it made me sit down and I had an opportunity to talk with them about where I wanted to go. And so I felt very privileged to be able to, at that age, change my course slightly. And really that's part of what's led me to this point in my life now.
What led you back from, obviously you're in a beautiful place there at the doorstep of the Barrier Reef. So what led you to come back to England to pursue your degree versus, say, staying at James Cook?
Yeah, well, James Cook at the time, I did secure a place there, but I simply couldn't afford to go. So, these things cost money and funding, and funding, it's the core thing of everything that we do in life. And that was a lesson I learned quite early on, was that I couldn't afford to go there. And ironically, when I finally came back to the UK some 2.5 years later, because I'd not been in the UK for that period of time, I didn't receive funding from my university here because I've been AWOL. No. And so it's this kind of crazy catch-22 situation, but you work your way through these things. And I came down here to Plymouth. It's a fantastic, it's Britain's ocean city. And it is a remarkable place to have an interest in the marine environment. And you have an incredible concentration of marine institutes, of expertise. And although the courses at Plymouth University were quite fledgling at that time, over the last few decades, it's become one of the UK's foremost and internationally recognised centre of marine excellence. And so, there really is a great deal on offer here. I went through my degree course. I had a year between a degree and a master's, and I came out of my master's course and actually went to work for the British Antarctic Survey, not in Antarctica. At the time, I wasn't able to travel in that manner for various reasons. But I worked up in Cambridge with BAS, looking at a host of issues there, and then finally came back to Plymouth to work at the Marine Biological Association on the Plymouth Marine Fauna Catalogue. And my work there flowed into working for the Marine Life Information Network and founding, along with Dr. Keith Hiscock, the work there. So I spent 6 years at the Marine Biological Association before applying for work at the Shark Trust, and I've been here for 20 years now. So
that's
wow,
amazing.
So you're pretty fortunate. You went straight from finish. Yeah, it is. It's from doing your master's. You went right into working for the Shark Trust from there.
From my master's to working for the British Antarctic Survey. I then went to work for the Marine Biological Association, and I spent 6 years there. From there, I came to the Shark Trust. So I think, I'm going to take that as a compliment, Dave, that you don't think I'm quite as old as I am. You can add all that maths up and figure out that I have had a significant birthday in the last 2 years.
You're just a kid. You're just a kid.
Just a kid. I'll take that.
It's interesting, working in the UK, there are some big names of sort of organizations or government institutions, and you've named 2 of them. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are listening to this who want to go into a career with sharks and want to be able to follow a similar path. The British Antarctic Survey, that's not an easy place to get into. Can you just talk a little bit about how that came to be, and was it just more of an application and you got in, like your application worked, or there's a lot of people who have trouble getting past that sort of area?
Yeah, and I mean, I have to be clear. I didn't go into the field, so this was working at the BAS offices in Cambridge. I was working on a field guide with one of their resident scientists, and this was an opportunity that came up to do a small grant project for a set period of time. So these opportunities do exist, and I think this is one of the things, and I know we'll get on to talking about Sharks International later on, but one of the issues that came up there, not issues, but one of the points that was raised very much at the beginning by Michelle Heipel was the need to network and how important it is to network, to be around and be available to help with things. And I've already mentioned the importance of Plymouth to me in terms of the number of volunteer opportunities through the organizations and institutes that are here. So when you think about developing your career, it may be, I had a choice of locations for my master's, but I came back to Plymouth not because I knew the city, but because I knew the opportunities that could be had. And so I could see that I could get a range of volunteer opportunities, and a lot of them aren't glamorous. I spent months picking microfauna out of kelp holdfast following the CM Press oil spill that happened off the coast of in the Bristol Channel. And I would be paid a chocolate bar every 2 days for this work. Now, I didn't do it for the chocolate bars, I can assure you. I did it because it was really fascinating experience. And there are these opportunities, and they're not always the glamorous work, but they're fascinating. But they also allow you to meet people, to engage with people. And then if an opportunity comes up, you might well be in their mind. There's someone that's worked hard, that's applied themselves to something, and you're available. And we say that to the students that come through our doors is, always, if you have an opportunity to rapporteur for something, do it, because then you're useful and helpful and can engage and you'll meet people. But the importance of networking is key. And that's how, in fact, my path has been helped through my career, really. From the work I got at the Marine Biological Association was associated to somebody who knew there was an opportunity, who passed my name on, and so on and so forth.
An important thing too is a lot of people think like because let's say want to go and studying sharks, they feel like each step of their journey has to be doing sharks. They don't realize like there's these other things that, like you did, the networking at that early part of your career was more important than whether you're doing sharks. And that's what I try to tell people, like, don't worry if you have to do something else. It's just it's that networking, it's making that connections, and then you get that opportunity like as you did. But it's like I think that's, in addition to the networking, I think the fact that you were just willing to do whatever you needed to do because you had a curious mind, you thought it'd be interesting.
So transferable skills, Dave, absolutely. Develop those transferable skills, do something that makes you stand out. And I do feel for the students of today, when we advertise for a job at the Shark Trust, we will have, for one job, we had well over 200 applications, and from people who are very well qualified. But what stands out to me as a potential employer are those students who've done something a bit different, who've really shown initiative, who've applied themselves, who've perhaps taken on a job that isn't glamorous or exciting sounding, but you can see the value in what they've done and the skills that they will have learned from that. And that they're also conscious of contemporary issues, not just the issues that are set within the courses. And it's really important that students take that on, that there's such a wealth of volunteer opportunity out there, but you've also got to look for the path least traveled on those points. So you have something novel to offer and you can stand out as a result.
But to start out with the Shark Trust, it was pretty much still in its sort of early stages, wasn't it? When the Shark, can you tell us a little bit about the Shark Trust, a little bit about the background, the history of the Shark Trust, for those that may not be familiar with it?
Yes, absolutely. So we were founded in 1997. It's our 25th anniversary year this year.
Congrats.
And thank you. Yeah. One of our founder members is Sarah Fowler, who is a name I'm sure well known to many of your listeners.
We've had her on, yeah.
There you go. And the Shark Trust started very much as an awareness within our statutory agencies here in the UK, our government, that elasmobranchs needed representation. We're talking in the late 1990s when there was minimal management. It was a very, very different landscape for Sharkscapes, rays, and Chimaeridae. It started out as a question as to whether there needed to be a short-term campaign. And there were some very big ticket items in those days. There was no finning regulation, for one thing. And if we consider Europe's role, we were part of Europe in those days as well. It started out that, did we need a campaign or did we need an entity, an organization? And through the assistance of a number of bodies, the Shark Trust was founded. Initially up at the offices that Sarah Fowler was working out of in Newbury, and then it moved down to Plymouth and had residency as such within the grounds of the National Marine Aquarium. And I started as the first conservation officer for the Trust in 2002. And there were three of us working in various formats for the trust at that time, including our head of finance and administration, who's still with us today, Glenn Seafield. So she's been with the trust 22 years, which is phenomenal. And over that time, many people whose names are well known to you will have come through our doors, will have been advisors to the trust. And we really appreciate that the family that we have that have helped us develop over the decades. But we've moved from being a very small organization. Still, we were the Secretariat of the European and Latin American Association. We've grown and developed, and we've been in our current premises now since 2006. And our staff base has grown and diversified. And we now have a conservation team. We have a communications section. We have people working on fundraising and education. And it's really positive to see how the organization has not only developed in size, but also in scope and reach. And for a small organization, because we are sort of a modest sized organization, we have a fairly remarkable footprint, but that is achieved by having a team around us who are happy to work hard and also to work very collaboratively. So collaborative working is incredibly important to us. There's some phenomenal organizations and individuals out there, and it just makes sense. We have some really long-term trusted partnerships.
When you first started at the Shark Trust, it was probably in its fifth year, maybe in the fifth or sixth year, still small. I'm always on the career focus here. Like, what was your thinking going into it? It seems as though like an organization, we see organizations start up all the time and still in their infancy. Were you ever worried about the risk that organization wasn't going to make it to 20 years, or 25 years? Like it's risky in terms of funding, how everything is funding and everything. I know like at that time we were looking at the Census of Marine Life was really big at that time. And so more focus was put on sharks globally, but it's still risky as an individual to team up or start working for an organization like that. Did you ever feel that way?
Part of me is an eternal optimist. You have to be to work in this sector. It's something that over the years I have to increasingly nurture, that level of optimism. I'm always thinking that the more my hair gets grey, the more cynical. I think it's a representation of my cynicism. But you have to hold on to that optimism. And if you work in the charity sector, and we are a charity, we're a science-based organization. We have an interesting remit of work, but we are a charity. But so is the Marine Biological Association, and so is the British Antarctic Survey. Every one of these is reliant on funding. And so I truly believe that you have to have faith in what it is that you're trying to deliver, and that you will manage to secure funding. And that doesn't just come along on a plate. It involves working hard, identifying funders, developing relationships, having a good product to sell. I think, to be honest, and the reason I laughed when you first asked me that was because I probably never thought of that. I just thought, here is an issue that we need to work on. At the time, it was pushing through the shark finning regulation in the EU. And then we had a host of species that were completely unmanaged, that were desperately in need of either fisheries management or prohibitions or otherwise. And there was just a lot of work to be done. And that, for me, is what I focused on coming into this, is, all of these challenges that we had opportunity to try to address. And, I have to say, coming into the Shark Trust, my background wasn't one of, long-term shark fascination as such. I came into the trust with a broad range of skills, and this comes back to what we were saying before about transferable skills. Coming into a small organization, having a broad range of skills and a willingness to work across issues was perhaps a stronger requirement, because I was surrounded by people with an incredible shark knowledge. And that's where you can feed from and learn from.
Developed your program, obviously been very successful, expanded it. You get some of the programs, one of the ones I kind of found really interesting was you guys have the Great Egg Case Hunt.
Yes.
Honestly, that is, I think, a tremendous thinking outside the box, like to get the public interested to go out in the beaches and look for skate, ray, and shark egg cases and report them back to you. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, that was anyway, tell us a little bit about that program.
You're taking me back many, many years. Next year is the 20th anniversary of the Great Egg Case Hunt. And, I hope that you can find time in your program to have the project officer of that, Kat Gordon, onto your show just to talk about egg cases, because in the last 10, 11 years, she's really brought that program on. But when we started back in 2003, when we launched it, we were doing, as an organization, we were doing work with the industry on trying to separate out skate and ray landings. So we had aggregated landings here in the UK. We were doing a lot of work on identification. So a big bread and butter piece of work for the Shark Trust is on creating identification materials. If you can't identify it, you can't report it properly, and we can't manage it properly. But we also needed to engage the public the British public in a greater understanding that we have a diversity of sharks, skates and rays off our coast, and they aren't something to necessarily be concerned about. They are important parts of our marine biodiversity. And in fact, you can engage in shark conservation without having to go diving in the tropics. But it actually started in the first place by my partner and I were avid kite surfers. We still love kite surfing, but our life revolved any spare time around kite surfing. And we were on a fantastic beach, Bantham Beach, just down the coast from Plymouth. And he came over to me, and he's a big Yorkshireman. And he came over to me holding this thing, and he said, "I think this has something to do with you," and gave me this egg case that he'd found tangled up in his kite lines. And, no disrespect to my partner, we're 20 years in. I thought, well, if you're going to pick these things up, then, we could get lots of people to pick these things up. And so it really rolled out from there. And we had some initial funding from the Countryside Council for Wales, as it was then. And we had egg case material in multiple languages, and we engaged with some of the beach clean groups. And, it started off small with people just, we needed to know this egg case comes from this animal. And there was an absence of that knowledge at that time. So working with aquariums, working with research scientists, really trying to do that whole matchup. And, it wasn't until, quite recently with the split of the common skate species, with the two species splitting out in that complex, that we managed to sort of fit those final British species to their parent animal, because we didn't know. And that's not just that the Shark Trust didn't know, it was just it wasn't aware. And there are some publications out on this now. And so what started off as sort of a bit of a detective story has become something that really enables us to look at the diversity of species around our coast, to engage the public in this process, to become more effort driven in how we're running this. And there's a lot of really exciting opportunities coming up. But it's also a project that's then spun off into other countries. So we have sister projects in a number of European countries. There's parallel projects in Ireland and in France. We've just started work with Cicero in Australia. In North America, we have project work going on. So it's really a captivating activity, but it also is something in such a technological world that we now live in. There's something very simple and very satisfying about going for a walk on a beach and finding a shark or a skate egg case. It's fantastic.
I have to admit, when we talked to Paul about this initially, Paul Cox, who's a colleague of yours at the Shark Trust, I never even thought that was possible to be able to find that many egg cases or any egg case along the coastline at all. And it gets me excited to, like, the next time I'm along a coastline, I'm going to be searching for these. I'm going to get, my kids involved, and we're going to go around searching for it and see if we can find any. It's also interesting to see how that program has grown into knowing more about sharks, just from people picking up these egg cases and taking record of them. That's it's such an innovative program using citizen scientists. Did your coalition help in spreading this program, or how does that work from, a small organization to do that?
Our main coalitions tends to be more on our advocacy activities. We have different partnership work for our citizen science work. And so we've done a great deal of activity through some of the sort of wildlife trusts, through aquariums, both in the UK and overseas, and through partner organizations, through things like the European Elasmobranch Association. But one of the sort of key factors we decided early on is that we produce resources and then we kind of offer them out and say, right, is this relevant to you? Would you like this translated? And so we try and ensure that people can engage in those materials, when we were developing these projects in the simplest way possible. And so it enabled the spread in those early days of this work with less effort from other organizations. It was enabling them to have sort of a ready project to move out with, basically. So, but the public are just enthusiastic, and if you find something on a beach in another country, they're letting us know, which is fantastic. So it's enabling CAT to start really working up a catalogue of global finds and working with colleagues and new contacts made through things like Sharks International to look at the development of a global egg case guide, which would be really exciting.
I feel like it's also a way for people to really just get back into exploring the beach. I think, there's always that key of looking for shark teeth or looking for seashells and things, but to look for an egg case and to be able to find an egg case. I mean, that's something that, like I said, I have butterflies in my stomach, thinking about it. Right.
Yeah. And they're amazing things. I mean, the shapes and the form and function of them are quite incredible. And so, I challenge people not to be fascinated by what they find, and then you can hydrate them. They become flexible. They're remarkable things.
Absolutely.
Remind people listening to the episode that with sharks and skates and these egg layers, the egg cases are unique to each species. So if you find one, we can theoretically tell you what species specific it came from. So they're not just random; they're very species specific. And as Ali mentioned, one of the big skates species over there that's been critically endangered, it turned out, rather than being one species, it turned out it's two species that are critically endangered. But that's good to know that we have multiple species, and one of the ways you can do that, in addition to some of the morphological characters, are the egg cases can help describe that. So it's a cool way to kind of, like when you're out at the beach, I mean, you just walk around, look around, and you find something interesting, and and especially now with digital cameras, your camera phone, just take pictures of it.
So there's online recording. If you go to eggcase.org, there's a world of resources there that you can check out. And they're not just for the UK, they're for numerous countries. And we will take records from anywhere, but preferably with a photograph. It's always good to see what people are talking about.
It's amazing to think like you could be taking a long walk on the beach and contribute to conservation of sharks. Like that's what it really comes down to is, I always have people like, oh, how can I help? I'm like, just take a long walk on the beach and look, don't look at the sunset all the time, although it's beautiful. Just look down, look along the coastline, maybe get in the water a little bit and see where you find these things. It's just phenomenal. I love this program. I love the idea. I love the creativity and just the thought of it. I think it's just, it's amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're very fond of it as well.
We get into Sharks International in just a moment, but I know yesterday, it turns out, was International Basking Shark Day. Do you guys have anything special going on? November 3rd? I had no idea.
I mean, basking sharks are a fantastic species for us here in the UK. To have the second largest fish in the world swim around our coastline, it's a great opportunity. And again, something for citizen science. It's a species that, in the summer months, we do see at the surface. It's something the public can therefore be engaged in seeing. But it's also a species that the Shark Trust has had long involvement in securing protection for. I mean, we have to recall they were still commercially targeted until the mid-1990s. And, I feel that that's quite recent, but many people see it as the past, but it's quite recent. From sort of 1998 onwards, we saw an increase in their protected status through both domestic and European regulations, and then going out wider than that through CITES and CMS. Very much now seen as an ambassador for wildlife. And this is one of the conundrums we have with elasmobranch conservation, is that the majority of them are seen as commercial species. Whereas we have a small handful that are considered wildlife. And very simplistically, I always say you don't eat wildlife, but you do eat fish. It's that whole issue as to how we take species across that divide. Obviously, basking sharks bring with them they can be seen at the surface. They only have vestigial teeth, so they're not the big toothy specimens. They're remarkably charismatic as well. And so they make a fantastic ambassador, but it's not always as easy to bring other species that have equal levels of conservation concern across that gap, especially where there's been a historic commercial interest. So I would say we've got angel sharks across there nice and neatly, some of the other large charismatics that you encounter globally. But here in the Northeast Atlantic, species like porbeagle, for example, sort of sit in that mid space. They were commercially extremely popular, very high value food fish. But they're now, unfortunately, critically endangered species. They're heavily listed, and we need to see them given that full level of protection for population rebuilding to permit and to give them the space for that, a long-lived species. And yet, as they have historically been of commercial interest, there's often that reticence to see that species sort of move across that divide. And so we find that, how you reflect the management and conservation needs for Elastomerrangus is always confused by the fact they are either targeted or wanted bycatch in many fisheries, even though people may consider that they shouldn't be retained in that fashion. But that took us off the link of International Basking Shark Day. So, we do like to celebrate basking sharks. We do like to encourage people to understand how to engage with them safely, because ecotourism is this, a booming sector. But they are a very heavily protected species, and they are a species that needs to be well respected. They are capable of breaching, they're capable of fast movement, and they can be sizable creatures. And so, we do a lot of work as well on encouraging appropriate levels of interaction, safe distancing for, I was only talking yesterday with one of my colleagues about, the evolution and the development of our codes of conduct for basking shark engagement. And that started way back in 2004. And we're now in a scenario where we have to consider drones and SUPs and, jet skis and all sorts of different watercraft. And that sort of change in recreational water use and sort of interest of the public in encountering marine wildlife comes with it, the chance of more encounters, more sightings, more records, but also the need for the public to be conscious of the importance of basking sharks and the importance of giving wildlife space.
Move on, talk a little bit about the Sharks International Conference that just wrapped up.
For those that don't know, Sharks International happens every 4 years. This was the 4th edition. And to become the host of Sharks International, you need to apply to tender for the conference before the previous meet. So back in 2018, the Shark Trusts were encouraged to put in a proposal for Sharks International to be in Europe. And we thought about this and decided this was a good plan, but not to be here in the UK, but to take a conference to Spain as one of the largest shark fishing nations globally, and specifically to take it onto the coast of the Mediterranean, being, one of the places where the threats to sharks and skeleton rays are significant. So we put forward a proposal for a conference to be held in Valencia, and Valencia is a remarkable city, both for its history, its UNESCO heritage sites, and for its modern interpretation on museums and aquariums through the Cité of Science and Arts, which is a fantastic space age environment that many people have seen in sci-fi movies and just not realized it. But at the heart of that as well, we wanted to take what has been a traditional scientific symposium and sort of stretch that envelope and bring in a greater emphasis on the need for effective communication of science, to bring in more on policy and advocacy, and really to demonstrate the importance and value of all of these facets that can come together to support effective shark conservation or management. And so to really make research work, to help develop new connections through the community and really make us all more effective. This was our concept. This was our dream and the intention to hold the conference in Valencia. And then COVID came along. And
a little global pandemic.
A little bump in the road. And the concept of global conferencing changed completely. And, we all started working online more, which was a very constructive and helpful way. But we also, the constraints of bringing hundreds and hundreds of people from numerous countries together in one closed environment was something that was doubtful for much of that time period. And, it wasn't until very, very sort of late in 2021 when we started thinking, this is something that could be feasible, but that we really wanted to take advantage of the sort of more sophisticated online conferencing platforms that had developed and make the conference accessible, but also cover the fact that there could be another wave of the pandemic. So if we created an online conference and then complemented that with an in-person event, that in-person event could be picked up and moved online if necessary, if it became impossible to host it. What we didn't realize at the time in developing this was that we were creating something that was 2 conferences, but it meant that we just had to revisit how we proposed to fund it. We had to talk with a wider set of funding bodies. And, there was a positive appetite out there to support this approach. And, I'm not saying that change doesn't come with its own problems, but, we had over 580 delegates across the 2 events. We created a platform that allowed us to separate out the online conferencing sessions so that globally you should have been able to watch some of it in daylight hours wherever you were in the world. To have this recording opportunity, so all of the presentations were pre-recorded but with live Q&A, really enabled us to now have a replay function which has hours and hours of content that the delegates can revisit for 12 months. We had online poster booths and workshops and all sorts of other activities. And this has enabled a greater inclusivity. We had people able to watch from, all around the world. We had 69 presentations from over 69 countries. And through the online event, we had over 440,000 minutes of viewing. So that amounted to about 310 days of viewing. Which was incredibly positive, and the energy we got from the audience was phenomenal. And yes, we were joking earlier that Paul and I had a little sort of breakfast television studio set up in our office here.
Just so the audience understands, you'd pull up when they were between sessions, Ali and Paul Cox, who were like for me, it was the morning show. The morning hosts out there are like, "Welcome to Sharks International today." And it was done very professionally and very well done. Watching the morning TV.
Lots of coffee. It was
absolutely best breakfast television you can find if you're a shark enthusiast, right?
Absolutely. But what was great was that we had some postgraduates helping run with the technology. We had the full Shark Trust team. We had our host colleagues in Spain, so Lamna and Subnon, all working together. And then with the support and funding from Save Our Seas Foundation and the Shark Conservation Fund, we managed to make this happen, followed up by 4 days in Valencia, where we had a remarkable exchange of aquarium skills on the first day, and then 3 days of more traditional symposium, but still with that online audience engaged. So yes, it was different. We did try to bring in more communications, and we hope we've started something there. And we will be revisiting that content through the next 12 months and bringing it back to the audiences in new packages, because there was, a remarkable standard of work that was presented, some incredible progress. And, we really are genuinely grateful to everyone who engaged, who was willing to give something a bit different a try. And we hope that some of those ideas will flow into the next conference. And we're already talking to the team in Sri Lanka about what we can, if we can offer any of our experiences to them and help them with the development of what they're doing.
I think it was you guys kind of laid a roadmap for future conferences in general. I think that was a takeaway I had from the whole thing as someone I've been involved in conferences, and you guys really, I think, laid out a template, like, this is a roadmap to go forward. And I think that I hope other societies and stuff look at that. Maybe not have to do it on the same grand scale you did, because you had 4 years to plan for it. But you can certainly do a lot of that for even just annual conferences to make it more accessible to people. You can get people more engaged. Knowing I can go back and watch any of those talks over the next 12 months is great, because it turned out that during the virtual component of it, some of the talks I really wanted to catch were like at 1 or 2 in the morning for me, which was a little early for me. So, but I can go back and watch them now. And for one, I just can't tell you what a remarkable job you guys, your team did there. It was really terrific.
I think a lot of times, like, you guys were forced into this into for a certain degree, obviously because of global pandemic, so you had to adapt, and you kind of came with the calling. I feel as though also though a virtual conference has always been on the table or has always been discussed by delegates in many conferences and many different organizations that I've been involved with, just because of the accessibility and also the bonus, just as Dave says, like, we can watch this for another 12 months, of access, and we don't have to worry about missing anything. We can still contact that person if we want to collaborate or if we want to discuss it more, have more conversations out of it. So in a live situation, when there are, congruent, talks and sessions, it's very difficult to find each one. That's always been, people are like, there are too many talks for me to go to. It's too little time. And here you have the chance to go back and watch it, and anyone around the world can watch it. And I think that is the benefit. I mean, as someone who does science communication as a content creator, there's so much content now that you have that you can put out, obviously with permissions and so forth, but you can put out on YouTube, on social media, to really, accentuate all the good and all the talks and all the research that was shared at this conference, not only in person, but also from a virtual standpoint. So I feel like this is the new way forward for conferences. And now, for Sharks International, at least, you have the template, and now you can hopefully help to transfer that over to the organization or the organizers that are doing the work for Sri Lanka, which is where the next Sharks International will be held. So that's, it's exciting, it's new, and I love the fact that that's sort of where you go. Now, just one last question, on Sharks International is, what are your sort of overall sort of takeaways from Sharks International that you had this year?
How phenomenally enthusiastic and dedicated the community are. There was so much passion to deliver work, to show new engagement, but also how much potential we have there. I loved how many students were present for their first conference, and so you not only had the senior experienced members of the community there, and we had some phenomenal keynote speakers, we had some fantastic delegates, but we also had people new to their first conference, and that was their first experience, and they were coming up buzzing and engaged, and they'd met people, and they had opportunity and passion to keep going forwards with what they were doing. And I think that was really empowering for me to see that was what they were getting out of that. But it really was that issue of having people included and being able to reach that widest possible audience. And so the takeaways for me are, we need to keep these conversations going. We need to appreciate the value of real effective science communication, not just being able to give a good presentation, but to understand the basis of message delivery in terms of what we want to achieve. I hope that we see the research community not only producing research that is focused on their original hypothesis, but looking around them and saying, what questions can I answer with this, and who can I pass this information on to make sure my research has legs and really engages in the delivery of shark conservation, because so many of our funding applications across the community say this will contribute to conservation, so let's make it contribute to conservation. I want to look at what the constraints are to seeing more research scientists engaged in conservation and management issues. And so for me, as somebody who, I identify professionally as a conservation advocate, to have scientists come into that forum, to have them engage at the data prep, at the stock assessment end of decision making is so important, because we can have the most informed decisions come from that. So I hope through all of this process, we've understood more about the role of citizen science in the delivery of conservation, that we've understood that there are different facets to this issue, and that all of them together have a place and a value, and that the more we actually work in that collaborative fashion, the more we will achieve.
My last question to you: where do you see yourself going from here, Ali?
Wow, That's a big question, Dave. Immediately, we have a number of big meetings on the horizon. So, in just 1 week's time, the ICAT conference of parties that starts. So the ICAT annual meeting starts, and on the table there for Erasmus, we have proposals for South Atlantic Mako. We need to see blue shark allocation. We have fins naturally attached coming up again, an essential element of effective fisheries management. And running in parallel with that, we have CITES Conference of Parties in Panama, which will see the largest number of shark proposals brought to the table ever, with all of the Carcharodontidae, with proposals for guitar fishes, for freshwater stingrays and smaller hammerheads. And so there's a lot going on, and that's just before November finishes. So there's a real momentum in our wider world, a lot that can be achieved. But what we need to see is then engagement with implementation of what comes out of all of these meetings. So the meetings themselves, they may get things onto the list, they may get things profiled, and then we need as a community to work on ensuring that they then, dig in and deliver for the future of these species.
Wonderful. Ali, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been such a pleasure to have you on and to dive into your career and sort of your thoughts and the programs that you've helped build at the Shark Trust. And thank you so much for all the contributions you've made, especially with Sharks International recently. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you invite you back on in the future to talk more about Shark Trust and the programs that are going on and dive deeper into the shark conservation that you're doing. So thank you so much for joining us.